Microservices tutorial series. So in the previous session we have discussed how to we register a producer consumer application and how the consumer application is going to consume your RESTful web service using microservices architecture. And in this video I am going to show you to register the both producer and consumer applications as a microservices clients to the discovery server. So here we are going to use with Neflix Eureka Server as a discovery server. So let's get started. So we have seen in the previous video what is Eureka Server and what is the role of a Eureka Server, and also to make a Eureka Server application, how do we build our Spring Boot project, and the annotation we use with enable Eureka Server. And we need to add a dependency with Spring Cloud Starter Eureka Server so that it will behave like a discovery service application. And we need to add a required properties. This also we have discussed in the previous video. And coming to how do we register a client application? What exactly is a client application is, so for a Eureka Discovery Server application, the number of microservices, like it can be producer applications or it can be consumer applications, can be registered as a client. So every producer or a consumer application is going to be a client for your Eureka Server. So here for producer application and consumer application, we build by using Spring Boot application, and it can have other components of the application like your controllers and other parts of your application. And here the annotation we need to use is enable Eureka client. So let's get started with the hands-on example. By making use the same example like in the previous video, I have shown you one employee producer application and the consumer application. The same producer and consumer we are going to register with the Eureka Server in this example. So first I am going to create a Eureka Server application where I said you need to use with the @enable Eureka Server. And the dependencies we need is a new dependency called Spring Boot Starter Eureka Server. And then the properties we need to configure with the server port, and the register with Eureka is a false. So this much is the configuration we need for Eureka Server application. Let's start the Eureka Server application. When we start the Eureka Server, first it is going to start with the dashboard, which we are calling it as a discovery server dashboard. And in that dashboard we could able to see the status of the discovery server and the number of instances registered with, and as we have not registered with any client application as of now, so it will be showing the number of instances as 0. We can see the dashboard available with the port number 8761. This 8761 is a default port for Eureka. You can also configure into a different port number. Once we are confirmed with the Eureka Server is ready status, then we can display with the 8761 port number. Now it is saying you have started Eureka Server with the port number 8761. Let us go here. Check with the Eureka Server dashboard. So now it is going to display with your Eureka server dashboard, where the number of instances registered with Eureka is, now we have not registered with any producer or consumer application, just we created only the Eureka server application and just started with, we are just looking into the dashboard. Here it can show you the server properties like total memory available and then number of CPUs utilized, what we have discussed already in the previous session, right? So this is how the discovery server can be started with. The next step we are going to do is, we need to register a producer application and then the consumer application. So now the producer and as well as the consumer applications are nothing but they are the client for your Eureka server. So we need to take a separate Spring Boot projects by enabling with Eureka client for both producer and as well as consumer. That is what we are going to do now. So we created a producer application in which we have the same the employee controller class, in which we are going to produce with one employee object, and this is going to be a simple microservice Spring Boot application, but we need to add with enable discovery client. This is a new additional annotation we need to add with. And then coming to the properties, you need to specify if you wanted to make use of this producer as a service in a separate port, then we can also run with the port number. And then this should be the client for your Eureka server, which is already started with. So for which you need to specify eureka.client.service url.default zone would be your Eureka server port. It means this will become, this producer application will become now a microservice client application to your Eureka server. And for every application, every instance you are going to create in your discovery server should be provided with an instance name. This is what is the instance we will be using for further to consume your microservice. We will not be directly connecting to the producer application with direct URL and its port number. That is what is the facility provided by this discovery server. So it can maintain the number of instances you create with, and it will show you the status of each instance. Now this is the instance we are going to create. We will be registering with your registry server, and it can also run on a separate port 8762. Let us start this application. It means we are going to register with one of the Eureka client application, which is an employee producer application, and which is going to be registered with your Eureka server on the port 8761, and its instance name is employee-producer, and your server application is running on 8762 port number. Now your Eureka client application is getting deployed, and this will get registered with your existing Eureka server, which is already started, but as of now it is showing the number of instances available is 0, so no instances available, as our instance is getting started with our producer instance, employee producer instance. Now by looking into the status in the console, we can wait for some time, let that port number 8762 is started and your instance is registered with your Eureka server. Employee producer instance get created. First let us check whether the server is on. So as this is running on port number called 8762 and the URL is employee, just we will be testing with that employee producer application. So your producer service is up, it is running successfully. And also now we need to check that whether the instance is registered into your Eureka server or not. So let's move to Eureka dashboard and let's refresh. It has to show our employee producer instance. It get created with availability zones and the status of your instance and the port number in which running, and then the instance name it will be showing with. So this is how it got registered. Now what is the next step we are going to do into our microservices architecture? So now we will be creating another Spring Boot application. This is also a microservice client, and the purpose of this client application is to consume your one of your microservice. So the producer application is producing your employee details. Now this is the employee consumer application is going to consume your employee service. To consume it, as we know, we need to make use of REST template. In the previous example, in the employee consumer application, you can observe when you wanted to call any of the service from your server, you need a URL of your server application, right? So you need a service in which the port it is running, and then the entire URL, and you are going to consume it. The REST template, there are certain limitations with REST template to consume your services that we have discussed into the REST API versus with the web client applications. Now here, instead of providing directly with the server URL, so in a microservices architecture, we are going to get a facility like we are getting an instance name rather directly connecting to your server's URL. So this is the instance name we will be making use to consume it. Once the instance is created here, with that instance you can get the URL, which is very secured method of programming, and then you can pass your URL, you can consume the content from a service application. This is how we are going to write a consumer application. This consumer is also one of a microservice client application for your Eureka server. So let us run this application. So this application properties, if you can look into, it is going to run on 8764 port. Anyway, this application is going to show our response at the console. So we are going to get the response at the console. So let us deploy this consumer application. How it is making use of your producer instance from your Eureka dashboard, and how it is able to consume your service, we can see practically now. We are going to start with one more microservice client application, that is employee consumer application, different number, but this is also getting registered with your Eureka. So here you can see we have to put default, that this is also going to be registered with, and every client, microservice client, provided with an application name which is going to be nothing but microservice. So here is an instance name is going to be employee consumer. So when we run the consumer application, we are able to consume it, we are able to get the application. Now you can see we are not directly connecting through your your employee consumer producer application, which is running on a different port, right? Now we are just connecting through your Eureka, and then in a highly secured fashion, and then we are able to consume the content. So now let us look into our Eureka dashboard, and let us check whether the employee consumer, here first we will cross check like in the console whether the consumer instance is getting created or not, whether it is started or not. Once it is started, once again we can go back to Eureka dashboard and we can check for the instances created with. So here in the dashboard, now it must be able to show us the number of instances is running is 2 now. So the first instance is going to be a server application which is producing your employee details, and the second instance is going to be employee consumer which is going to be a client application to consume your producer. So which is going to be a employee consumer application. This is how the Eureka server is registering your producer consumer applications and providing a communication between the multiple microservice applications in a lightweight fashion by displaying the status and the instances and the port numbers of the multiple microservices registered with. So that is how we can register a client application, and we can provide communication between the client and service applications, microservices and microservice client applications, right? This is what we are just looking into, one of the Eureka server with the discovery server features, and in the future sessions we are going to practice with the config server. How do we provide these configurations globally into either GitHub repository or a local Git, and then how do we configure, we will be looking into. And if you like this video, do like it.